Wireless LAN Professionals Podcast, episode 184.
This year we celebrate 20 years Wi-Fi. Your point is totally right about complexity, and Wi-Fi 6 is reducing complexity to a very high extent. So,
Wireless LAN Professionals is a place to educate, inform, encourage, and entertain those involved in wireless LANs. This Wireless LAN Professionals podcast is an audio manifestation of these goals. Our host is a wireless LAN veteran, consultant, designer, and teacher, Keith Parsons. And now, the podcast for wireless LAN professionals by wireless LAN professionals.
Welcome back to Wireless LAN Professionals podcast. My name is Keith Parsons, and I'm here today with Cees Links. Did I pronounce your name right?
Cees Links is the name.
I just totally butchered that. My apologies.
No problem.
It looks that way when you read it.
Yeah.
And you're with Qorvo, but you have a long history of being in the wireless LAN community for a very, very long time, predating most people who are listening to our podcast. Just so you know, the people who listen to this podcast are wireless LAN professionals. They work day in and day out with wireless LANs, and most of them probably don't even know you. I saw you speak at a Wi-Fi Now conference in DC and thought it would be a wonderful opportunity to introduce you and some of the things you've been involved in the past and what you're working on in the future to this audience.
Yeah, you're right. I'm in the industry, for over 30 years. And my first wireless local area networking presentation was in 1988. So it was very much concept at that time, but that's how far it goes back.
Most of us don't have that long of history. I'm barely touching on 20 years now, and I think I'm an old man. So you're speaking to us today from the Netherlands, and you'd mentioned earlier before we started the recording that it's a nice summer evening there and kids playing in the river behind your house.
Exactly. So it's almost an idyllic picture, but at the same time, it's great to have a conversation with you on the phone. Thank you very much.
Well, I'm glad you could join us. I didn't know who you were, but until I met you at Wi-Fi Now. But what I did remember was an article you wrote, maybe 8-9 years ago, about your first meeting with Steve Jobs. And I remember reading that article and then later found out, that was you that wrote it. You want to just give us a quick recap of that first experience you had meeting Steve Jobs and getting Wi-Fi into the Apple world?
Yeah, that kind of was an interesting engagement. But just to put it in perspective, this was 1999. And at that time, we have been trying to sell wireless local area networking for several years, including trying to sell it to Apple. Maybe you remember the Apple Newton, the first PDA, as it was called, a personal device, kind of a precursor to a smartphone. And we thought Wi-Fi in that PDA, would be a great thing, but Apple was not interested. But a few years later, when Steve Jobs himself had returned to Apple, I believe in 1998, Steve Jobs wanted to push Apple from the desktop space into the laptop space, and he was planning and preparing the launch of a Apple iBook. An Apple laptop, an Apple portable device. And he was looking for a unique differentiation, and he thought wireless local area networking could be a cool thing for that. So I got a call from one of his lieutenants, and it was something like, can you present coming Monday to Steve Jobs about your local area networking solution? Of course, I took the challenge, hopped on a plane from Amsterdam to San Francisco, and presented to Steve Jobs wireless local area networking. And it was a very funny meeting because when you present to Steve Jobs, essentially he does the talking. And the only thing you do is put on the slides. It was the time of overhead projectors. So I had to put a slide on an overhead projector. And he talked and explained what he needed. And then he told me, put on the next slide. I put on the next slide. And he continued talking until after 4 or 5 slides, he asked me, do you understand what we need? And, it was pretty clear to me. And then he stood up and walked out of the meeting. and the rest was left to his lieutenants, and one of them was Tim Cook at that time. So negotiated with the Apple team a deal to integrate the first Wi-Fi in the Apple iBook, and that was the breakthrough of wireless local area network.
Well, and once Apple started on that, everyone else got on board. Compaq used to be around back then, and they got on board. So
Yeah.
you've been around for a long time and changed most of our lives, and the lives of our children and grandchildren too.
I have an 18-year-old son, and if I ask him, "Do you know there was life before Wi-Fi?" He looks at me and says, "I have no clue how that would have been, but it must have been very boring."
So that was a nice history. You were with Lucent at the time?
Yeah, actually, there was during the 90s, I started working on Wi-Fi with NCR computers, and AT&T acquired NCR, and a few years later, Lucent Technologies spun out of AT&T, and my team, my business unit, kind of transferred from NCR to AT&T to Lucent, and I didn't even have to change my chair.
You've obviously been around for a long time in this industry. What are you working on now?
Yeah, well, what you probably know is that over the years, we worked through several generations of Wi-Fi. The technical naming is a little bit weird. It's .11b or .11n. The current generation is .11ac, and the Wi-Fi Alliance has made a smart decision to give a little bit of a better naming. So what they have decided is what is out there. They call it Wi-Fi 5. So that's essentially what technologists know as .11ac, but Wi-Fi 5 runs a little bit smoother over the tongue. And what we are working on now is, well, no surprise, it's called Wi-Fi 6. For the technologists, it's the .11ax, but that's not the name that we are going to use in the market. And in the course of this year, that will be kind of launched as Wi-Fi 6, as the new generation of Wi-Fi, set of new and very attractive features. And the fun part, of course, is it's Wi-Fi 6. It's in technology one step up and one leg up compared to 5G. And it will be very complementary to 5G. So when the outdoor world is moving to 5G, the indoor world is moving to the next generation of Wi-Fi called Wi-Fi 6.
We get a lot of people who ask us, because we're in the Wi-Fi world, what's the difference between Wi-Fi 6 and 5G? Because those are the simple terms, the marketing terms that people use. In your experience, what is the difference, and are they fighting against each other? Are they complementary? How do you foresee the future of 5G and Wi-Fi 6?
Well, give you an interesting story. When 3G came out, people said you don't need Wi-Fi anymore. When 4G LTE came out, people said you don't need Wi-Fi anymore. And now we are heading for 5G for our smartphones outdoor. The fact of the matter just is that indoor coverage with your cellular network is not fast enough, and it is not robust enough. And just like with the previous generation's Wi-Fi, also Wi-Fi 6 will be very complementary to 5G, where 5G is the outdoor cellular network for you on the road, and you'll be happy to switch to Wi-Fi 6 indoor when you're with your smartphone or your tablet or laptop indoor, and you connect with Wi-Fi to the network, and you have very solid, robust, and very, very high-speed connectivity with Wi-Fi 6.
So how do you foresee that handoff? Today we have Wi-Fi indoors, works fine. Cellular outdoors works fine. Cellular also works indoors with in most locations with 4G. 5G is going to have a different set, not working as well indoors. So the result is there's going to be a handoff. What's that handoff process look like?
Well, the handoff process between 5G and Wi-Fi 6 will be exactly the same as 4G and what we have today, Wi-Fi or Wi-Fi 5. As soon as you are within your home, a familiar Wi-Fi environment, or as soon as you are in the office in a familiar Wi-Fi environment, your smartphone will automatically revert to Wi-Fi because that is the cheap, lowest cost connectivity. Unless you have, say, an all-you-can-eat cellular networking subscription, Wi-Fi does not require a SIM card, and it will continue to not require a SIM card. And in terms of highest data rates, it will continue to beat the data rate of 5G.
So, you kind of skipped my question. That's not actually a handoff. That's just changing entire networks. So if you were in the middle of a call, there is no handoff. Today, if you're in your house and you're surfing the net, you go into your driveway and you have really bad Wi-Fi signal, but it's still good enough, so you still haven't got off your Wi-Fi. What's going to happen at that fringe, right at the edge between bad Wi-Fi and good cellular?
Yeah. And I see. I wasn't trying to avoid a question here. If you are on your cellular network and you have a cellular call and you go into your house, you will be able to continue your cellular call on the cellular network, totally uninterrupted. Wi-Fi is not taking it over. Wi-Fi is just, existing next to the cellular phone call in the cellular world. But if you have a typical packet-oriented connection, there will be no handoff. There may be an interruption, but from a usage perspective, you will not notice that you will go from one place to the other place.
In our industry, our audience is people who deal with Wi-Fi day in and day out, and they use mostly enterprise class machines, Qualcomm, Theros, Marvell kind of chip technologies. You are now with Qorvo. How does Qorvo and your chipsets fit in the ecosystem of Wi-Fi?
Let me explain what we do in Qorvo. When we talk about Wi-Fi and our contribution to the Wi-Fi industry, we do everything between the Broadcom or the Qualcomm or the Marvell or the MediaTek Wi-Fi chip in the antenna. And usually when you look there, you find the power amplifiers, low noise amplifiers, diplexers, filters. The space that Qorvo is in is between the Wi-Fi chip and the antenna. So we work together with all the companies that you mentioned. We have joint reference designs, and we help these companies to really make robust and high power Wi-Fi products. So Qorvo is not a Wi-Fi SoC provider, as it is called. So we don't do the Wi-Fi chip, but we do everything around the Wi-Fi chip. And in particular, we take care of range. We take care of interference rejection, whether that is interference from other Wi-Fi signals in other channels, or whether that's interference from 4G or 5G signals. So that's the space that Qorvo is in. One typical example where Qorvo is in is if you have multiple channels and the channels to the edge of the band need to back off with lower power because otherwise they create too much spurious outside of the band. Then with our filtering technology, we enable to have in this channel also the maximum power, because with our filters, we make sure that the signal of Wi-Fi is not kind of bleeding out of the Wi-Fi band. So we do all the kind of the RF technology around Wi-Fi, where Wi-Fi is probably best known for protocol and protocol type of activity. We do everything that is real the core RF and is making a difference in range. It's making in robustness. It's making the differences in real performance.
You have my thanks, because you're the unsung heroes out there making sure all the pieces work. So on the front side, between the antenna and the chipset, you have low noise amplifiers and front end modules that do all that front end pieces. You also mentioned you have bandpass filters, and there's a bunch of different varieties that make those work. Um, in both of those sets of equipment that you manufacture, one of the things we see in the industry is there's a wide, very wide range of manufacturer suggested retail prices. A high-end Cisco or Aruba or Ruckus might cost 1,200 euro, and yet you could buy another AP that is 60 euro. From your standpoint, in the little pieces that you take, is there that big of a price differential in the pieces that you're offering to these same vendors? So say a front end module or a low noise amplifier, is there a wide range of those as well?
Oh, absolutely. And we probably need to introduce another term, and the term is capacity. And capacity means multiple users can use the same access point or the same router or the same set-top box at the same time at the highest performance. When you talk about a really kind of low cost access point, as you for instance see in a hotel room, then the number of devices supported is rather limited, and it's the number of devices that are being used in a single hotel room. When you talk about, and in particular, say a Cisco or a Ruckus in an enterprise environment, you are talking about multiple to even many users using a single access point over different channels at the same time. And it's not that one person needs to have good performance. It may be that 10 or 20 people need to have good performance. And now we're talking about real robust Wi-Fi, where you want to optimize the usage of all the channels, but you want to also be able to radiate on all the channels at maximum power. And that is where Corvo technology kicks in. It's very interesting. There is not a lot of difference between the Wi-Fi chips as such. The difference is being made to a large extent to what the front end between the chip and the antenna is doing. Because when users experience really solid, high performance Wi-Fi, it is because the front end modules and the power amplifiers and the low noise amplifiers and the filters that are included in the product. Now, that makes the product more expensive, clearly. But in a way, you get what you pay for, right?
So you sell a low noise amplifier, a low, I don't know, say low quality, but a lower price point and a higher price point with higher capabilities on each of these components you sell as well. So if I came to you and I was like, I want to make an AP, you'd give me a menu of different front end modules I could choose from.
That is correct. From low power to high power, but frankly speaking, it's a low power in many situations. Customers select to not include an power amplifier because they don't care about range if the range is just the scope of a hotel room. So we really understand that there is a large variety of use cases from a hotel room and a few devices to bigger venues with many users, and that is creating a large portfolio.
Well, now I'm going to ask the hard question. If you have all these things available that you sell to manufacturers, if you're a home user, would you see an improvement in your Wi-Fi if you bought a higher end access point?
Well, I mean, there is also a large variety of homes, right? So we need to kind of put in perspective what we think with home and what is important in home. Range is important in independent homes where you want to have, say, range up until the backyard. And by the way, Wi-Fi 6 is going to create an integrated solution that instead of multiple access points and repeaters, you can get now an installation with one SSID that covers your whole house, and it may have multiple pods, multiple access points, but at the same time, it's one SSID and it operates as if you are operating in one single network. On the other hand, if you live in a relatively small house or in an apartment building where if you turn on your computer, you can see, a whole series of Wi-Fi access points, not only your own Wi-Fi access point, but also of the neighbor and the neighbor of the neighbor, or the downstairs neighbors of the upstairs neighbors. What you need in that type of situation is you need, good filtering. That when you connect to your access point, that you really can use the technology and that you can use the maximum bandwidth to the access point that you want to connect to. So in that situation, range is less of an issue. But what is really required there is interference rejection, and that you're able to listen on your own channel to your own access point and not being interfered with the channels and access points from your neighbors. So in that situation, you don't need high power amplifier. You probably can live with mid power amplifier. But what you want in that case is good filtering. And you want to be able to filter out interference from other signals or interference from LTE. So it really depends on the situation. And what you see when access point builders or set-top box builders develop products, they really develop a product for different type of houses, from condos to large freestanding houses. And it is really kind of tuned to the needs of the different type of houses, what type of access point you need.
It would be so nice if we lived in a world where everything was easy. You had a little quote that we love to quote within our community is the words "it depends." Comes up on, people say, how many clients can you put on an AP? Well, it depends. How many APs do I need here? It depends. It's just the answer because there's so many moving parts. One of the things I like to look at in doing wireless LAN design or troubleshooting is to look at the current MCS so we can find out what the negotiated current modulation scheme is. Do your little products, either the low noise amplifiers or the front end modules or the extra filtering, help to maintain a higher modulation? And if so, how do you upsell that to a vendor saying this chipset will do these things, maintaining a higher modulation over a longer period of time? How do you go about talking about how you can keep higher MCS if you get better pieces?
That question is probably more related to the SoC than that it is related to the power amplifiers or the front ends. What we do with the front ends and the power amplifiers is, and we have solutions for 2x2 and 4x4 and 8x8 antenna schemes. What we supply there is depending on, is it a mid-range or is it a high-range device? We provide front ends for every chain. So in 2x2, you have 2 power amplifiers or front ends. If you talk 8x8, you have 8. And it comes back also to the previous question. It depends, but it has really to do with the overall configuration of the system that you want to use. And what we see that is many customers, they have a portfolio of products, and their selection is very much based on, what is their expectation of the number of users, and what is the expectation of the type of activity. Is it for video? Is it for standard internet performance? That's actually the line of thinking in terms of how our customers go about the technologies and what type of MCS capability they would expect.
Well, thank you. Appreciate your answer there. It's a complex thing that we have get this Wi-Fi to work. Even after 20 years of Wi-Fi, we're still playing with the subtle nuances from the front ends to the actual SoCs to the environment, and someone's choice of antenna will even make those kind of differences. What's next online for Qorvo? From your website, it looks like you're moving a lot into the IoT space as well.
Yeah, and to close off your previous statement, this year we celebrate 20 years Wi-Fi. And, your point is totally right about complexity. And Wi-Fi 6 is reducing complexity to a very high extent. So that in particular, you don't have to kind of keep track of all the SSIDs in your house. You can just live with one. But what you have to realize at the same time, in that 20 years, the data rate has increased from 11 megabits per second to close to 10 gigabits per second. So a factor 1,000 in 20 years. And getting all those bits and bytes through the air at the capacity that we are talking about, so multiple users using Wi-Fi at the same time, there is a very complex problem being solved, and that is going from what we thought in the past was you can get maximum 1 bit per hertz, now into, you can get hundreds of thousands of bits per hertz just by using all kind of RF technology that is enabling this, and that's what is making this such cool stuff. Now, what is playing on the back, and that comes to your question, that is Qorvo is also very active in the IoT space. Next to computers and laptops and tablets and phones watching videos over Wi-Fi, there are also kind of more and more devices getting into the home where high data rate is not the name of the game, but where long battery life is the name of the game. And we talk about sensors, we talk about motion sensors, security sensors, we talk about door locks, we talk about light switches. And I mean, just for putting things in perspective, the expectation is that you may have soon 100 devices in your house that are battery operated and connected to the network. And if the battery life of these 100 devices would be, say, 1 year, and you have 100 devices, that means you'll have to change 2 devices, the batteries, every week. And that's not a very user-friendly proposition. So instead of using Wi-Fi, there is a new technology. It's called Zigbee. It's low power. It is really for battery operating devices. And what we are offering to the market is Zigbee with capabilities where the battery life exceeds the life of the product. So you have a built-in battery, and that battery lives with the product for its lifetime. And these devices also just connect to the network. The expectation is that in all future routers, there will be a Zigbee chip talking to all the sensor nodes in your house, whether these are door locks or motion sensors or light switches. And they're just part of your Wi-Fi network. And just creates one big integrated network, and Wi-Fi 6 with IoT is the key enabler for that.
From a design standpoint, the last 20 years learning and having tools that'll help us do a better job of designing to make sure we have appropriate coverage where we need it. What kind of changes might we see in Zigbee that we would need to adjust our designs to make sure that the Zigbee devices are just as happy as the Wi-Fi devices?
We call that concept, one pod per room. And Wi-Fi 6 has a so-called distributed architecture. You can have multiple devices. So, I mean, just make it very practical. You go to Best Buy, and instead of one router, you buy one router with a bunch of satellites. And the one router, goes onto the cable or onto the fiber, say at the front door. And the satellites, they go into different rooms, and they connect and automatically configure themselves with the main router at the front door. And that's why we call it one pod per room. All the devices in a room, they don't have to talk with the router at the front door, but they talk with the pod in the room. And the pod in the room creates the connection to the router at the front door. And that way, whether a device is a Wi-Fi device or whether the device is a low-power Zigbee device, it's all becoming part of one integrated Wi-Fi 6 network. And that's in the way we see the future, and that's what we're working on, because it really simplifies the whole setup and the whole configuration. It uses all the key features of Wi-Fi 6, and it preserves all the capabilities of low-power Zigbee devices, where you have the battery life exceeding the life of the product. And if you think even a step further, mentioning devices that you can talk to, the Google devices or the Amazon devices, the Alexas and the Echoes, you can even imagine that in every dot in every pod, you can talk to the pod with verbal communications as well. So also Wi-Fi 6 is very well equipped for that. And with its distributed architecture, you can connect to every pod in every room, not only with Wi-Fi, but also with Zigbee and also with voice. You can talk to it. So our anticipation of the future is a completely connected world where in every room you can seamlessly connect to the internet and integrating that and making sure that there is no interference, making sure there is proper recognition. That are all the key technology areas that Corvo is working on.
I'm assuming you're talking about Wi-Fi 6 as using part of it as the mesh backhaul between the pods. Are you thinking of using Wi-Fi 6 like you're still having access on 5 gig, but you're also using the 5 gig, some sub portion of that for the mesh?
Yeah, that's correct. The real key strengths of Wi-Fi 6 is that it will auto-configurate and that it can determine based on the quality of the signal and the required range what is the best configuration in terms of frequency usage. This will be kind of all disappearing under the hood. If you connect to a Wi-Fi network now, if you say you have a Netgear router, you have to select whether you want to connect over the 2.4 or over the 5 gigahertz. And it's a little bit kind of how should I say, it's like for technical people, but in terms of laymen, why would you want to know whether you connect via a 2 or a 5 gigahertz signal? You just want to have good connectivity. Now, the real key of Wi-Fi 6 is that selecting a typical frequency will kind of just disappear under the hood of the router, and it will configure itself. And the only thing you have to do is make sure that you connect to the Wi-Fi 6 infrastructure in your house, and whether it's 2 gigahertz, 5 gigahertz, or in the future 6 gigahertz, you don't have to worry about it because that will all be taken care of itself.
Do you see this self-configuring system leaving just the small homes or even large homes and moving into an enterprise space as well using that same technology?
Absolutely. In enterprise environments, there are already tools at a higher layer in place to make this happen. So you can roam through an office from floor to floor, but that's all at the higher layer, where at the higher level all these configurations are held together. It's in the future it will be done with Wi-Fi 6 in a way more efficient, integrated manner. So the effect will be the same, but the implementation will be way more efficient.
Well, you've given us a lot to think about. We started out talking about 20 plus years ago, talking with Steve Jobs and how it's turned into the Wi-Fi we have today. And we talked also about the future of where we're moving forward with Wi-Fi 6. You've been around for almost your entire business life. Do you foresee making any changes in the future in your own career?
I'm a little bit married with Wi-Fi. But frankly speaking, my wife was a member of the Wireless Ethernet Compatibility Association, and she was on the board, and she led the effort to rename wireless Ethernet compatibility into Wi-Fi. So when we both get on a plane with a Wi-Fi logo, we basically kind of look at each other and realize that we may be the only people on the plane who know the history of the Wi-Fi logo, and of course we feel very proud about it. So it's a very dynamic industry, and even by the day of today, I'm just thrilled by how dynamic it is, and it's just pretty cool place to be in. No, I don't expect to go anywhere else. I have lived here and I will live here, and that's the place where I will end my career.
Well, that is a great note to end this podcast interview on. Thank you so much for your time, and definitely thank you for the effect you've had on our entire industry. I appreciate your time today, sir.
You're very welcome. Thank you very much.
10 Talks.
Welcome, everybody. My name is Ben Miller. Info is on the board there, CWNE number 12. Twitter is Ben underscore sniff Wi-Fi. And I want to talk a little bit about channel utilization. Channel utilization is something we've obviously heard a couple times today. I work for USC, and in talking with our primary vendor, we sometimes talk a little bit about channel utilization. But I feel like it's something that sometimes gets overused and focused on too much. And so I want to talk a little bit about kind of why that is and why, for the most part, I ignore channel utilization. It's something that it doesn't mean you don't need a spectrum analyzer, but it's not something that I pay a lot of attention to. I start out here with a real world example. This is just from something that I saw at work. One channel about 8% utilization, the other channel about 20% utilization, and hopefully the pictures come in relatively clearly. At the time I'm doing the little testing here, both of them look relatively clean in the spectrogram. Obviously the right hand side, you can kind of see that there's that red line at the bottom that's giving away kind of the issue there. And the point there is that even though there was a lower channel utilization, once I started doing a throughput test, the throughput test was much lower in the first example, and so it mentions there kind of the other things I did, loading just a website, and I want to talk about some of the reasons why that is, why you might see channel utilization relatively low and the channel struggling, or channel utilization relatively high and the channel still working very well. Before you go out and do what this shoddily drawn person here is doing and tossing the whole thing. So I'll start out with kind of the theory behind channel utilization. It was touched on a little bit earlier on by Jim. Time is the one thing that we don't have the ability to stretch in any way. 10 seconds is 10 seconds, 5 seconds is 5 seconds. And wireless LAN devices have to share the channel. So if a certain amount of channel time is being utilized, that means that channel time is unavailable for other devices to be able to use it. The reason, though, that I really don't like using the channel utilization statistic, and I find that other things are a little bit more useful when analyzing a network, is because of the fact that the channel utilization is just looking at raw activity. It's just looking at, is this channel busy at a given moment, and what percentage of those given moments is a channel busy. And I find that it kind of ignores a little bit about how Wi-Fi works, about how the 802.11 standard operates. One issue in looking at channel utilization is some channel utilization is perfectly fine and good, and other channel utilization is not so good, is sort of bad. And we talk a little bit about why that is here. And the issue is just that a spectrum analyzer, when it shows you channel utilization numbers, does not have the ability to differentiate between the good and the bad. An amount of time that's taken up with a successful frame transmission or a high rate frame transmission is going to be sort of efficiently used channel time. If there's a low rate frame transmission, if there's an unsuccessful frame transmission, that's not a great use of channel time. But a channel utilization tool, a spectrum analyzer, doesn't really have the ability to differentiate between those two. I have a little kind of white slide so I can do some drawing here. If we have kind of just a standard 802.11 AC frame transmission, you're going to get somewhere in the neighborhood of about 40 microseconds for that physical layer header. And then you'll start your variable rate data. And if you have your variable rate data, and let's say you have about a 315 megabit per second frame, that's going to be somewhere on the order of another 40 microseconds, kind of going across the channel using your channel. And so that's an 80 microsecond period where the channel is kind of efficiently utilized, where it's well utilized. But if you have low rate traffic, if you're down, say, in the mid 60s, let's say about 65 megabits per second, you still have the same approximately 40 microsecond physical layer, but that data link layer, your 802.11 header and your actual application data, that's going to be in the hundreds. That's going to be somewhere around 180 microseconds that you're using there. And so when you add that up, you can kind of have maybe 3 of these things happening in the same amount of time as you have one of the other things happening. I forgot to mention, this is all with a 1500 byte frame. That's where these numbers are calculated. And so you can essentially have about the same amount of channel utilization with approximately triple the amount of traffic going across. Similar thing applies to wireless collisions. If some of those 315 megabit per second frames are not received successfully, then the exact same frame has to be resent. Then that's sort of a waste of your 80 microseconds, not even counting whatever CSMA CA time then has to happen between the frames. And that's kind of an inefficient use of channel time, but you can't tell that in channel utilization. You're still going to see the same channel utilization numbers, whether it's successful data or unsuccessful, whether it's high rate data or low rate data. And that's kind of a big issue of why I sometimes cringe a little bit when I see too much stuff about channel utilization. I mentioned a couple of other things to note about channel utilization. Channel utilization does not necessarily show channel availability, just because of how the 802.11 protocol works with CSMA CA, with carrier sense, multiple access, with collision avoidance. This was kind of touched on a little bit earlier on in one of the presentations, but every device on a channel, I was using channel number 157 back there. Every device on channel 157 is going to essentially get an equal opportunity to access that channel. So even if I have very, very high utilization, even if there's a lot of data going across the channel, a new device is still going to have an opportunity to access the channel. So it doesn't necessarily mean that a high usage channel, a high channel utilization channel is a problem, or a low channel utilization channel is not a problem. And so that's kind of another issue with channel utilization. The last issue I'm mentioning is an issue for those of you who use channel bonding. If you don't use the 20 megahertz wide channel, if you use the 40, or if you use the 80 megahertz wide channel, maybe there's some folks that use the 160, the primary channel is always going to have more natural channel utilization. The only part of the channel that's used by management traffic or control traffic is the primary part of the channel. This is a screenshot that I took earlier in the day today. There's one of the conference center 2 access points has a primary channel of channel 149. It's using the 40 megahertz width. At the time I took the screenshot, it wasn't particularly busy, so I kind of purposely wanted to take a screenshot when there wasn't a tremendous amount of data, and hopefully you can see it okay, but the channel number 149 half is just a lot more naturally busy, and that tends to happen because of the fact that management and control traffic only operates on the primary channel. So the management traffic, that'd be your beacons, your probes, any connection association stuff. Control traffic would be acknowledgments, request to send, clear to send, etc. I'm kind of being very negative about channel utilization, and I am. I'm not a big fan of doing much troubleshooting with channel utilization. But then the question is, well, what do you want to use instead? And at least in my opinion, I'm a big believer in the usage of protocol analyzers. Protocol analyzers allow you to capture the wireless frames going across the network, and then you can see whether the traffic was high rate traffic or low rate traffic. whether the traffic was a successful communication or if it ended in a collision. The little retries, the retry flag in the 802.11 header will tell you whether something was successful or not successful. I mentioned a couple other things. Some of these things that you can look for with a channel are things that you don't necessarily need a protocol analyzer for, but, you know, high number of client devices, whether there's a lot of management traffic. Sometimes unassociated clients send a lot of management traffic. Those are the types of things that I would recommend looking for. And if you do have a spectrum analyzer, it still is good for some stuff. I just always encourage people to kind of limit their use of the spectrum analyzer to two primary things, which is number one, trying to identify interference, and then number two, trying to locate the source of the interference. So that's my little thing on channel utilization and kind of what some of the alternatives are. I enjoyed speaking with y'all.
Thank you for joining us for another episode of the Wireless LAN Professionals Podcast, the podcast for wireless LAN professionals by wireless LAN professionals. Be sure to follow us on Twitter at Wireless LAN Pros for all the latest news and updates, and also connect directly with Keith on Twitter at Keith R. Parsons. Head over to www.wlanpros.com for this episode's show notes, as well as the latest in all things Wi-Fi.